All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Amity Overall-Labe, and I'm the director of NORC, and we are very happy to have you here this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are in the country, for our quarterly TA talk about investigating complaints involving allegations of abuse. Next slide, please. For those of you that this may be your first TA talk, I wanted to just provide a few reminders. These we put on quarterly. We host these on Zoom, and they're also live streamed on Facebook. And we created these to provide an opportunity for you to learn directly from your peers and to receive technical assistance by the presenters and NORC staff. So they're supposed to be more of an informal conversation instead of a webinar, and we'll have plenty of time for conversation at the end after the presentation. If you have any ideas for topics, please email us. Don't hesitate. Let us know what you need. And also, just as a heads up, we will send out in early July an annual evaluation to get your feedback about what you want to hear about, what you need training on, what you think are the hot topics and your training needs, so we can design our work plan and make sure that we are responsive to your needs. Also, we are providing certificates of participation. So you may already be aware that you are required to have hours of continuing education each year. And so we were thinking that it would be helpful if our webinars provided these certificates, and you can share it with your supervisor and or your state ombudsman to get credit for those. So you have to participate in the live webinar, not a recording on our website, for at least 30 minutes. Your certificate will include your name, training details, and the amount of time that you spent on the webinar. And that link on that slide will take you to frequently asked questions about these certificates. So if you have any questions and those FAQs do not answer them, then you can email us as well. Next slide. Some other housekeeping. Please do not unmute your line unless you raise your hand, the little hand icon, which you can find those under, I believe, next to your name to raise your hand, and then we'll call on you and ask you to unmute your line. That just helps us at least maintain a certain level of chaos during the Q&A. You can ask questions via audio or chat on Zoom, but not obviously during the Facebook live stream. We're not watching that side. And you can submit questions in the chat at any time, and we'll try to address them during our discussion. At the very end, before we close out today, we will share a link for our evaluation for today's discussion. If you will complete that, please, we'd appreciate it. And as you may have already heard or seen, this is being recorded, and we will post the recording and all the materials shortly after our live presentation and email them to the entire network. Next slide. So we are very excited to have three excellent speakers with us today. First, we have Beverly Lawbert. She's the National Ombudsman Program Coordinator with the Administration for Community Living, otherwise known as ACL. Last fall, Bev was introduced in this position, and previously, she has a very distinguished career in the Ohio Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. She served 33 years, with 26 of those as the state ombudsman. And she also held the position of State Unit on Aging Director in 2018. Unfortunately, Bev could not be with us today, but she did share a recording of her presentation. And after we view that recording, Dale and Jessica will share their case study. Dale Watson is the South Carolina State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and Jessica Winters is a Regional Long-Term Care Ombudsman for the South Carolina program. In recognition of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, or WEAD, earlier this month, the purpose of today's call is to discuss the role of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program in investigating complaints that involve allegations of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. In Bev's recorded remarks, she reviews pertinent federal requirements and guidance that explain the role of the program in these investigations. Following her presentation, Dale and Jessica will share a case example with local and state level advocacy in coordination with other vital entities. And like I said, after the presentations, there'll be plenty of time for question and discussion. And we want to hear from you if you have any best practices or examples you'd like to share about the work you're doing related to abuse in long-term care facilities. So again, feel free to submit your questions in the chat at any time or raise your hand when it's time for Q&A. And with that, Libby, if you want to go to the next slide, we will share Bev's recording.
Thank you for joining today's TA Talk. The work you do is recognized and appreciated by the Administration for Community Living, and I always like the opportunity to communicate that, so I'm glad you're here today. This topic is especially timely as we wrap up the review of annual reports through the National Ombudsman reporting system, and I want to show you how important your reporting is. So this slide shows data about abuse complaints. In 20 and 21, abuse complaints moved into the top 5 complaints that you handled. When looking at the 5-year history, from 2017 to 2019, physical abuse complaints increased by 8.4%. But from 2019 to 2021, the increase was 52%, making the 5-year increase from 2017 to 2021, 65% increase in physical abuse complaints. If you want to hear more about the national perspective on these complaints, be sure to find the Consumer Voices podcast that we recorded in recognition of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Lori Smetanka from the Consumer Voice, Laura Mosqueda from the National Center on Elder Abuse, and I had a great conversation about the gut-wrenching topic of abuse in long-term care. As I thought about the underpinnings of the Ombudsman role in investigating complaints about abuse, neglect, and exploitation, I decided to start with the keys to effectiveness. These keys apply to all of your work as advocates. You are resident-directed and people who develop trust through relationships. You are credible because you keep information confidential and apply your knowledge and skill to every problem. The Older Americans Act and the Ombudsman Rule provide support for your authority and direction for your work. So this slide shows an excerpt from the Older Americans Act, and it's repeated in the rule that you identify, investigate, and resolve complaints that are made by or on behalf of residents, and you can also be a complainant, and relate to the action, inaction, or decisions that may adversely affect the health, safety, welfare, or rights of residents. And I'll be saying that a lot. And it's the actions of providers of long-term care services, public agencies, or health and social service agencies that, again, impact the residents. So this is an excerpt from the Ombudsman Rule that went into effect in 2016, and I added some emphasis. The rule is specific to mention abuse complaints and indicates that for these and all complaints, the purpose of investigation is resolution as determined by the resident and protection. The rule requires us to maximize resident participation in a variety of ways. You offer privacy to the resident. You take time to determine the resident's perspective on the complaint. You obtain informed consent and determine the wishes of the resident with respect to resolution of the complaint, including whether the allegations are to be reported, and if so, whether to disclose identifying information when you make those reports. You advise residents of their rights and work with the resident on a plan of action for resolution. So again, you're maximizing resident participation. Then you investigate to determine verification, and you're going to include the resident in your investigation and determine whether the complaint is resolved to the satisfaction of the resident. We always need to think about what happens when a resident can't provide informed consent. The rule says that you may work with appropriate resident representatives if the resident is unable to communicate informed consent. Keep in mind that you must determine the extent of the resident representative's authority. If they're the guardian or have a power of attorney, make sure you know what they have the decision-making authority for, to make sure that it's relevant to what you need consent for. If the resident has no representative, then you work to resolve the complaint in order to protect the resident's health, safety, welfare, and rights, and determine whether the complaint was resolved to the satisfaction of the complainant. So that's different. Disclosure is a big topic in the ombudsman world. You may refer and disclose resident identifying information when the resident is unable to communicate informed consent, there is no resident representative, you have reasonable cause to believe that an action, inaction, or decision may adversely affect the health, safety, welfare, and rights of the resident. Also, as long as you have no evidence indicating the resident would not wish a referral to be made, and you have reasonable cause to believe a resident is, or a referral, excuse me, is in the best interest of the resident. And that's a big and that I've highlighted there. You obtain approval of your state ombudsman or otherwise follow the policies and procedures of the office. If you don't know the policy and procedure in your state, be sure to ask your state ombudsman. Now, this slide looks a lot like the previous slide, but there is a difference. Again, you may refer the complaint and disclose resident identifying information when the resident is unable to communicate informed consent and you have reasonable cause to believe that the resident representative has taken the action, inaction, or made a decision that will adversely affect the resident. So that's the difference here, is that you believe that it's the resident representative who is the bad actor. Then again, if you have no evidence indicating the resident would not wish a referral to be made, and you have reasonable cause to believe that a referral is in the best interest of the resident, and you obtain approval of the state ombudsman. This one is different from the previous slide. In this case, you have to have state ombudsman approval when it's the resident representative who is the bad actor. So what happens when you witness abuse, gross neglect, or exploitation? When you're making visits or talking with someone, what happens when you are the witness? So your program should have policies and procedures that require you to seek communication of informed consent. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to talk to the resident, tell them what you saw, and follow their direction. If the resident is unable to give you informed consent and there is no representative, there are some steps. You follow your complaint resolution procedures and you refer to the facility management and or an appropriate agency or agencies to determine whether the complaint is substantiated in the following circumstances. Again, you have no evidence indicating the resident would not wish a referral to be made. You have reasonable cause to believe the referral is in the best interest of the resident, and you obtain approval of the state ombudsman or otherwise follow policies and procedures. Again, know what the policies and procedures are. I suspect that some states might have a policy and procedure about this that says obtain approval of the state ombudsman. So just know what your state requires. Laws always come first, then administrative rules. Sometimes there are questions about how a rule is to be implemented, and agencies may develop what we call sub-regulatory guidance. We have a set of frequently asked questions on the ACL website and available through the Ombudsman Resource Center. And here is a link to that. There are two that I want to highlight for you. Question number 22 in the frequently asked questions. Here's an excerpt. The question is, does the rule prohibit an ombudsman or representatives of the office from being mandated reporters under state abuse reporting laws? The answer is yes. Both the Older Americans Act and the rule prohibit reporting of resident identifying information without the resident's consent. There are some other conditions that you can read in this FAQ. By logical extension, this precludes mandated reporting of suspected abuse that discloses such information. Through the strict disclosure limitations within the Act, Congress has indicated its intent for the Ombudsman program to be a safe, person-centered place for residents to bring their concerns. Go back to the first slide where I talked about, or the second slide, where I talked about the keys to effectiveness, and keeping a resident's confidence and being resident directed are keys to being an effective ombudsman. And it's important to note that despite multiple congressional reauthorizations of the Older Americans Act, Congress has never provided an exception for abuse reporting. Then the 23rd question in the FAQs, here's an excerpt. Does the rule prohibit ombudsman programs from investigating abuse complaints? Well, obviously, you're here for this webinar, and so you know that you may investigate abuse complaints. So the answer there is no, but the Older Americans Act and the rule require you to identify, investigate, resolve complaints, and so on. So I talked about that earlier. However, you are not the official entity to substantiate whether abuse happened, or in other words, you're not the finder of fact for abuse complaints on behalf of the state or other governmental entity. You represent the interests of residents, not the interests of the state or governmental entity. Now, the FAQs are much longer. This is just a snip from this particular question. So I encourage you to go look at the FAQs and understand what they say. And again, if you continue to have questions, pose those to your state ombudsman, contact the Ombudsman Resource Center. This again is sub-regulatory guidance, and we want it to be clear for you. So questions are good because it helps us. So I'm going to end with a couple more keys to effectiveness. All ombudsman work is challenging. Another key to being effective is getting comfortable with gray area. And there's a lot of gray area. Seeing the conditions that you see in long-term care facilities is hard enough. When abuse, neglect, and exploitation are the subject of the complaint, it's even worse. Ask questions and seek support. I'm glad that you're here today and among your peers and can talk about these issues, and I wish you well in your advocacy. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Libby. So I saw a question in the chat about those slides not matching the slides in the link that we posted in the chat. So I wanted to just be clear that that was a recording embedded in the slides, and we will make sure that that slides are available separately as well when we post them on the website and send them out. So I wanted to provide you with a link to the podcast episode that she referenced during her remarks. If you haven't listened already, I encourage you to do so, as well as subscribing to the Pursuing Quality Long-Term Care podcast. I don't know if you follow podcasts as much as I do, but this is a good one to add to your list. And as you heard Bev mention, there was obviously a significant increase in complaints about abuse in both nursing facilities and residential care communities in NORS In fact, in federal fiscal year 2020, as she mentioned, abuse rose up to one of the top 5 complaints in both settings. And that is the first time that that has happened in at least a decade. So it's rather significant, and I'm glad you're all here to listen to this presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dale and Jessica, who's going to share their example. Next slide, thank you.
Hey, well, we'll get started, and we are so thankful to be invited to speak on the TA Talks. And it's our pleasure to present from South Carolina, where I think they're the best ombudsman in the absolute world, and I may be prejudiced about that. Definitely, I think they're the hardest working group. We are going to talk about how it got started, and I will come in and talk about what we do from the state level, and we'll go from there. Jessica.
Great. Yes, I'll echo what Dale said, and we appreciate you having us here to talk about the case study that we recently had. How it began. So this particular facility was, and you can go to next slide. Thank you. This particular facility has been on our radar for some time. I was able to go back to 2016 with issues that we received from the facility or from residents and family members at this particular facility. And we had ombudsmen, going in, checking on residents, talking with residents, trying to resolve the issues of personal needs allowance and medications and things like that, and did a lot of advocacy, opened many cases, and had multiple referrals. In South Carolina, we refer to the state licensing agency, which is the Department of Health and Environmental Control. We made referrals regarding medications, bed bugs, misuse of the stimulus money, and personal needs money, like I mentioned. We made referrals specifically on, we had January 2019. I kind of looked back on the history of this facility. April 2019, DHEC went in and found violations from our referral. We referred bed bug complaints in July of 19, October of 19, March of 2020, June of 2020, and January of 21. In January 2020 and April 21, DHEC found violations on bed bugs on both of those. I know I personally went in there and reviewed, what they had done to help eradicate the bed bugs, but clearly this was an ongoing issue with that facility. And finally, in 2020, we made referrals, and in 2021 regarding the stimulus checks. We were made aware of our referral from October 2020 was received and opened as a case by the Attorney General's office in South Carolina, and that was based on our referral. Next slide, please. So this is when the ball really started rolling with this facility after these allegations went to the Attorney General's office, and I believe there was a citizen complaint as well in regards to Social Security funds being misused by the facility. So what I wanted to note with going back in the history is that as ombudsmen, sometimes we have to be patient and we have to keep at it, and you're not going to, your first complaint, your first referral, you might not get the results that you want, but as you can see, we were steadily chipping away at this facility, and finally, all of that hard work, I guess, came to a conclusion in February of this year. We received notification at the state office that arrest warrants were signed for the facility administrator, and that he was arrested on Monday, February 14th. He was arrested on counts, pull my slide up here, on 10 counts of neglect of a vulnerable adult, 2 counts of exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and 1 count of breach of trust with fraudulent intent, the value of $10,000 or more. He was charged with taking a $66,000 Social Security check from one of the residents and purchasing a new car. So obviously there was even more issues than we even knew about going on. So once we received that arrest, Dale and I spoke, and we were concerned about staffing at the facility. The administrator's wife was the assistant administrator, so we knew that there was concern. We knew that they were freezing the facility's bank accounts, and concern on, whether the residents even had staff, because staff wasn't being paid. We didn't know how involved the administrator's wife was, so we immediately went to the facility and to go and check on the residents. The following day, our state agency issued an order for an emergency suspension of the facility's license. And that was due to multiple violations found by DHEC, including mismanagement of medication, building disrepair, facility cleanliness, pest management, and record keeping. And that is when we formed the relocation committee. And to follow up on that, the administrator's wife was arrested on March 4th, 2022. Next slide, please. And I'm going to let Dale talk about our relocation committee.
Thank you. As Jessica said, it was a long process, and we talked about the fact that it just takes a while sometimes to get these things done. In South Carolina, we have what's called a relocation oversight committee, and it's comprised of the state long-term care ombudsman. The regional ombudsman is called in to work, because that's the person who is closest to the situation. Our adult protective services, community long-term care from our Medicaid agency, and that's generally from the folk who are actually optional state supplement that pay for our residents to stay in residential care or assisted living facilities. As Jessica said, our licensing entity, we also have people who are entities that place the residents there. So if it is a resident who receives services from the Department of Mental Health, or Disabilities and Special Needs, or the VA, those entities are also part of the team that come together to support that resident. The Attorney General is on that team also. Part of then we have here in South Carolina a policy for that committee. And what happens is, as Jessica was saying, that we got a call from the Attorney General's office because they had decided to arrest the owner. And because of our communication, they were going to arrest him on a Friday. All ombudsmen know that Friday is the day of chaos if you're trying to arrest the administrator and freeze the account. So it would have thrown it into great chaos on a Friday afternoon because they had planned to arrest him on a Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. So it would have frozen all their assets on a Friday without, it just would have been chaos. So we were able to get them to hold off for a little bit. As Jessica said, this has been going on for several years, so 72 hours or more was not going to hurt the situation. It would be beneficial more for the residents. And so all these folk convened together on the phone for a couple of days to begin the process of working out who was going to be on ground, where we were going to be, who was going to be there, and the things that we needed to support the residents as we move forward with the closure. We knew that it was going to happen. We've seen it in the past. We've seen it with flooding, somebody's roof may have collapsed and things of that nature. So we have had several situations, and this has been going on for years. The committee has been going on for years. So it was just a matter of getting it going, and it's different for each facility based on what's going on, what we do, but the basic tenets are the same. Jessica?
Sure. Next slide, please. So to touch on what Beverly was talking about and how, as ombudsmen, we advocate and represent the interests of the resident. So, in a situation like this, where there was abuse and exploitation of the residents, it was our job to sit with the resident or each resident and find out, what it is that they understood, to explain to them what was happening. When we arrived to the facility the day after the emergency order to suspend the license was issued, at that time, the residents did not know that the facility was closing. They did not know that they would be moving to other facilities. So myself and my staff worked and spoke with each resident individually to, first of all, remind them of their rights, to let them know what was going on, explain the facility closure, explain that they would be relocated. We made sure they understood that they had an option, that they had a choice in where they were going to go. And also, unfortunately, had to explain to them that due to the bed bug issue, they would have to leave behind all of their belongings. And so that was something that was especially difficult to have to tell the residents. Not only were they having to leave their home that some of these residents had been in since the 80s at this particular facility, but they would then also have to leave behind their belongings. We wanted to make sure they knew where they were going. We contacted local facilities with the help of DSS to try to find facilities to relocate the residents to. We counseled each resident. We contacted the resident families and responsible parties with the permission of each resident. So we were able to get face sheets for each resident so that we could contact their closest family members so that they would know where the residents were relocated to. And knowing that they would have to leave everything behind, we collected the clothing and shoe sizes from each resident in order to further facilitate this move further down the line to get donations. Just important to remember that this is a traumatic experience for the resident, and that sometimes, with everyone else there, everybody has their part to play in a facility closure and an abuse situation, and everybody's an important player. However, the ombudsmen are truly the ones there for the residents, making sure the residents' voices are being heard, and where they want to go is being communicated.
Yeah, and I do want to step in a second, because in enclosures, oftentimes ombudsmen are the only ones who are making the voice of the resident being heard. And even at this one, there was a resident who wanted to who made a choice not to go back to a facility. And that was something that was facilitated by the ombudsman on scene, to be sure that those who were there heard that resident and honored her wishes.
Right, absolutely. Next slide, please. The outcome overall, we relocated 37 residents. 11 were transferred to a nursing home after our community long-term care person came out and evaluated them to realize that they actually needed a higher level of care, because this was a community residential care facility or assisted living facility. So they went to a higher level of care in a nursing home. 22 residents were transferred to a residential care facility, and we were fortunate that there was a new facility opening up that had enough beds to take all of the residents who wanted to go to that facility. So, which was nice to be able to keep those residents together with familiar faces. One resident was transferred to the hospital due to a wound care issue. We had 2 residents that decided to go home with their families, and then the resident that Dale just mentioned who elected to go to a hotel. That was a lot of people, were very concerned about that. And, we did have to advocate for her right to do that and make sure she understood, of course, that she needed a certain level of care that she wouldn't be able to get in a hotel, but she was very able to make that decision on her own. So we facilitated that for her. Our advocacy continued after the relocation. We provided toiletry items. The state office works, and Dale can talk about that. They work with another organization that provides relocation bags. So they came down from the state office, and we were able to provide bags with towels and clothes and shoes and things like that for the residents. The town where the original facility was located pulled together to get donations. So we were able to collect and distribute the donations to all 37 residents. We kept open communication with the resident families to allow them to know, how to contact their resident in the new facility, what that resident needed if the family was able to provide. Some families even went back to the old facility and were able to get some of the resident belongings out to decontaminate them. And we did follow up with the residents at the new facilities to ensure that they were acclimating to their new homes. And months later, we're still receiving calls from family members and residents to just kind of check on them and make sure things are going well. The process of pay sources, and getting that set up in the new facility, this happened mid-February, and May, I believe, is when they started receiving their funds, right? And we had to make sure they were receiving services and their medications, which was another issue at the old facility. Medications weren't there when residents left. So some residents weren't sent with medications because they didn't have them in the first place.
He was the pharmacy, he was the owner of the pharmacy also.
Right. Yes. There was a lot of stuff going on there. But overall, the residents were pleased with their new homes and happy to be out of that facility. And, of course, our advocacy, with those residents still continues to this day, but it was a learning experience for us. And I believe, we truly listened to the residents on what they wanted. And it was a great advocacy on the part of the whole team for these residents.
So for our part, as Jessica said, we work with a private entity that provides us with relocation bags for residents, and they're emergency relocation bags. And as Jessica said, they put a lot of things in those bags, and we try to put other items in and around, get other donations. So we just want to be sure that every resident leaves with a bag of hygiene items, with some clothing to start with, towels, washcloths, blanket. Just it's a big. It's about $250 worth of things in it, but we wanted to be sure that each resident has something to start with, and it's with dignity and respect, because it all started because residents have been doing an emergency relocation, were moved, and they were moved in with plastic, with black bags, and the residents' things were thrown away because the receiving facility thought that those things were trash. And in some of those bags, there were pictures, and those are things that could not be replaced. So we sought and found an entity that would fund moving bags, so that duffel bags, so that the residents could move with dignity and respect, and they would know where their things were, and to also just to start them off in a positive manner. But as Jessica said, this facility had fleas, bed bugs, all kinds of things. And so it was just lice. It was just they just couldn't take their belongings without those things being decontaminated. And the receiving facility did not want all those things in her new facility. But overall, we just want to let you guys know that we do have this. It works for us here in South Carolina. It is a team of folk who come together to provide information, to provide resources, to support the residents. But overall, it is the ombudsman who is the resident voice. And we remind people that we work at the behest and the direction of that resident, and being sure that they're heard, because it can be so many people moving in and around and trying to get things done that sometimes their voices are not heard. And it is the ombudsman who always makes that voice rise higher through the cacophony of all of that noise.
And I think that's it for us. Last slide just has our contact information. So thank you.
Thank you guys for allowing us to present.
Wow. Thank you, Dale and Jessica. So we included them because obviously it's an extreme example, but an excellent one. And I think we can all agree that the outcome would have been extremely different for residents had the Ombudsman program not been involved in literally every step of the way and making sure their needs were met. So it was an excellent example of coordination between the state ombudsman office and the regional programs, as well as coordination between the overall ombudsman program and outside agencies and programs. So thank you so much, Dale and Jessica. Another plug for y'all sending us what you do at NORC. We found out about this because Dale shared an article, a press release when they were arrested. And then we asked more questions about how that came about and found out about their involvement. And so if you walk away with one thing today, hopefully it's a lot of information about your role, of course, but also to let us know what you're doing out in the field so we can really highlight these examples of advocacy. They're absolutely fantastic. So we do have some questions that are coming in, and I also want to put in the chat right now. Obviously, with this example, the discussion of closures came up and the role of the Ombudsman program in helping residents relocate. So I wanted to highlight that on the NORC website, we have a nursing home closure page. It's specifically dedicated to nursing homes. However, a lot of that could be used in residential care communities as well. And there is a toolkit, a nursing home closure toolkit that highlights templates, examples from Ombudsman programs. I encourage you to review that if you haven't already. And I wrote down on my to-do list to have a future TA talk about closures. So I think we can really get in the weeds and talk about that more. So with that, next slide, Libby, I want to go over some key resources really quickly before we move to questions. Because that is another important part of these TA talks, is we want to remind you all of what we already have on the NORC website that you can either use in your training of program representatives, both staff and volunteers. You can use some of the materials in in-service training, and you can use some of the materials in consumer education. So these right here, the first link takes you to our issue page about abuse, neglect, and exploitation in long-term care facilities. It's one page where everything on this topic is on. So it's really long and you have to scroll down a bit, but you're going to find a lot of information. On that page is the second bullet, responding to allegations of abuse, and that is a reference guide for Ombudsman programs. In that reference guide, it provides the federal requirements and guidance, the role of the Ombudsman program that Bev reviewed, and it also provides several scenarios with kind of, this is what happened, the Ombudsman witnessed abuse, what do I do next? And it provides bullet points for advocacy steps. So you can use that one-on-one and just review it to see if it aligns with your practices, but you could also pull those scenarios out and train and use those as case examples with your representatives as well. The other resource that's highlighted here is a simple one-page front and back fact sheet about the Ombudsman program's role in investigating abuse. Really simple to understand, so it can be used for new representatives, family members, residents, facility staff, and other agencies you work with like APS, and help them understand your role. So I encourage you to look at those. Next slide. We also have this training toolkit about abuse, neglect, exploitation, and misappropriation of property in nursing homes. We created this after the nursing home regs were revised. There is a Prezi. A Prezi is just a video training, and you can play it all in its entirety with a voiceover, or you can pause it and use it in training. And there's also a clickable version that lets you maneuver it, and there's a no voiceover, just with a script. We also have a PowerPoint that you can use for in-service training or training of your representatives, and a fact sheet, all in that one toolkit. Next slide. On that abuse issue page I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of specific types of abuse or neglect or exploitation. There's one entire section dedicated to resident mistreatment, so I wanted to highlight that because one of the materials in there has been recently updated. We have an in-service slide deck that you can use. You can personalize, add your state and local specific information, and you can use it in facilities. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's an in-service training guide that will walk you through how you can use it. There's also a reference guide about resident-to-resident mistreatment and ombudsman advocacy considerations with that issue, and a consumer fact sheet as well. Next slide. As I mentioned a slide ago, there are a lot of different types of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And on that landing page on the North website, we have a ton of information, including this tip sheet, which is 10 things Ombudsman program representatives can do about financial exploitation. There is a consumer fact sheet about sexual abuse in nursing homes. There are several webinar recordings, and of course, links to federal requirements and guidance. So check all of that out. Let us know if you have any questions. And next slide, Libby. I want to get to our Q&A part of the presentation. So let me pull up what I pulled from the chat. I'm going to let Dale and Jessica answer this first one. I have some ideas, but I want to hear directly from those in the field. The first question was, please give me suggestions for how I would encourage staff to report to me or others specific people or circumstances that they know about but are unwilling to report. So the person that submitted that in the chat, can you clarify if you meant facility staff or if you meant your Ombudsman program staff that you supervise? That will make a difference.
I wish to the staff that's actually in the building when I go out to do inspections. They'll know things that I know they know, and they try to whisper kind of, but they're not comfortable giving me enough information. And I need a way to encourage them, and I'm not sure quite how to do that.
Okay. Jessica, Dale, y'all want to take a shot at that? And anyone else on the line, feel free to provide your input and how you deal with that in the field. We'd like to hear from you for some peer-to-peer support.
Jessica may want to click on, but one of the things that the Ombudsman do is really you have to establish a relationship with them, a relationship of trust that you are not going to share their information if they don't want that shared. And so oftentimes they know how to contact, they will contact the Ombudsman offline after hours, or they have their their work cells and things of that nature. Jessica?
Sure, yeah. I think for one, we try to do staff in service. Now that we're going back into facilities, doing staff in service on reporting abuse, neglect, exploitation, giving out our information. When I do those trainings, I give out a packet that has all of our contact information in it. When I'm going out to facilities, you can pass out your cards. It might be good to have an email. We have an email which is just ombud intake, and it's they can email complaints in if they don't want to call. We do explain, like Dale said, to all staff that they can report anonymously, and so we do get anonymous reports from staff. Most of the time they don't leave their name. I've even had times when I've been in a facility and I've been pulled aside by a staff member. I've heard a little whisper like psst, as I'm walking by the room and going in to the room and they kind of pull me aside and give me information. So, but I agree with Dale that, you know, establishing that trust, explaining that you're not going to use their name in the investigation if at all possible. And just also, I think it's important to remind them of the penalties of knowing, I mean, not in a, I mean, maybe a little bit of a scary way. I know in the past I've done a training with law enforcement who's also gotten in on the tail end of my presentation and talked about the, in South Carolina, you know, if you're a witness to something and you don't report it, you can also be charged with a misdemeanor. So kind of reminding them of their responsibility as a mandated reporter.
Thank you, Dale. Thanks, Jessica. If anyone has anything else to add, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. I completely agree, as well as reminding them about their duty to report since they are mandatory reporters, and that not only could they report anonymously to the Ombudsman program, but they could do the same for their state survey agency, or at least should be able to. So I know that's been controversial in some states, but there should be a way that they can report as well. And another, I guess, another avenue too would be if they report to, if it's a potential crime, report it to local law enforcement too, and that would be another anonymous way that they could call in a tip. So hopefully that helps. Another question, Dale, this came right in right before you shared a little bit more about the relocation bags. Asking what are they? So you already covered that, but the second question came in asking about your private contact. If this is a state-specific private contact, or maybe there's a national contact that other ombudsman programs could work with, or at least try.
It's a group that's indigenous to South Carolina. It's a group of ladies who basically heard about our plight and took us under their, just basically adopted us. It could have been Shriners, it could have been anybody, but it just resonated with them, what was going on. And so it could be anyone, but they're just very, they decided to take us on as a project, and it's been ongoing for many years. They don't, and so they give us about 40 bags a year to maintain this, and we've used them. It's just that kind of prevalent sometimes, but it's just a group who decided that they would take us on as a project when they heard about as I spoke about the need. They decided to meet the need.
Fantastic, thank you. And I wonder, it sounds like y'all will need to do some outreach locally or statewide to find a partner. But I think it's a very clear-cut example of how people can help directly, so it shouldn't be too difficult of a stretch. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's even some emergency preparedness groups or something that could be reached out to, because it's not just relocation during closures, obviously, but also emergencies. So right. That could be something to consider.
Yeah, because we have one. It was a result of a flood. The roof caved in because of a lot of rain. So so we had to pull together and move people quickly.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, we're seeing so many more odd natural disasters that we have to respond to. So another comment / question from Kathy Heron, and if you want to jump on, feel free, Kathy, but do any of you know about the gray disposable bags? You throw them in the water, the bag dissolves, and the clothes are sanitized. And I assume, Kathy, you're talking about like bed bug situations. Would those take care of things and sanitize them? Feel free to add if you had anything else. And if any of you know what Kathy was asking about, feel free to jump in.
Sure.
All right. I don't hear anything yet, but that's definitely something to look for. Oh, There we go. Thanks, Jennifer. She just provided an Amazon link. And Alexandria, I believe those are medical grade bags hospital use for infection control. Excellent. Thank you so much. See, you just have to ask and y'all have all the answers. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let me check my list. I'm not sure. There was a question about our allegations of sexual inappropriateness grounds for 30-day IVD. And I assume that means involuntary discharge for sexual appropriateness. And if anyone wants to elaborate from that message, but I would say in short, no, there's often a lot of reasons for sexual inappropriateness, whether it's actual intentional sexual assault or maybe I'm hearing a lot of background noise, just a second. Okay, sorry, I'm not sure if that was me. Or it could be someone with diminished mental capacity that's acting out. If you could mute your lines if you're not speaking, that'd be great. I'm still hearing the feedback. Thank you. So that's why they could be acting out. So it really depends on the reason and what the facility has done to prevent that from happening and how they've supported the resident. So it's not one of the actual reasons that someone could be discharged. It could fall under can't meet their needs, but the facility has to have done everything they possibly could have done to ensure the safety of that individual resident and others first. So I hope that addresses that question. Good question. Any other questions for Dale or Jessica? And John, I did see your question about MOUs, and no, I don't think we have any examples with law enforcement. I know we have examples of partnerships that local and state programs have developed with local law enforcement, in-service trainings that ombudsman programs have done for law enforcement and vice versa, but I don't know of any MOUs. If any of you on the line have examples or developed a great relationship with law enforcement, please put that in the chat. We'd like to speak with you too for future presentations.
Amity, I would just encourage everyone to not wait till an emergency occurs to develop a relationship with law enforcement or the licensing entity or any of the entities. We make it our business to do a training with almost each one of these entities every year, and just so we can stay in contact with them and that they know who we are and what we do. So we encourage everyone to develop a relationship as the year goes along, so that they understand what you do, and so that they will call you and they will make you aware of what's going on in facilities, because the ombudsmen often get calls from law enforcement or other entities also.
Thank you, Dale. Couldn't agree more. And yes, to respond to one final question before I move to close out, long-term care facilities are mandatory reporters. Absolutely. So that should be part of their initial training and ongoing training that they receive from their facility administrator and supervisors. And it's also something that ombudsman programs, of course, talk about whenever they provide in services as well. So good question. All right, next slide, Libby. So last but not least, and let me drop this into the chat before we close out. Please complete our evaluation. It's a very short SurveyMonkey evaluation. And we ask, of course, not just for feedback about today's presentation, but for ideas for future topics as well. So we develop our plans based on what you need. So please do so. Next slide. And last but not least, this is our contact slide. So if you're not familiar with our website, there's our landing page, our email address, and we're on social media too. So please follow us and share from our pages to yours and vice versa. And then we have an app as well. So if you haven't downloaded the NORC app, please find it. The goal of that app was to help you while you're out in the field get access to federal requirements, guidance, other resources you may need at your fingertips. So I want to give a huge thank you to Bev, Dale, and Jessica. We appreciate you so much for spending your time and sharing your expertise. Thanks to Libby for helping me on the back end behind the scenes, making today's talk happen. And thank you all for joining us today, as well for all of your advocacy. So thank you so much. You're an amazing group of advocates. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
All right,
Always good
thank
to hear
you.
from you.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.